and to tell you about, my day with the kids and what they've been doing and what they haven't been doing during COVID, trying to keep them entertained. And they're all in four different school groups: a college student, a high school almost a senior in high school who's going to graduate this year, one in middle school, and one in elementary school. So,
congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So, trying to keep them in line with everything that's going on and making sure that they're doing their work has, definitely put me in a situation where I'm constantly working at it. And Shahid, you're putting it on the Sister Act, right? Okay, making sure. Yeah, so it's just taking it day by day, although I'm not so sure what's happening with the weather. Oh, and I think
I'm wearing a sweater. It's so cold.
Yeah. We're good to go?
We're not going to get any sympathy here in Georgia. It's beautiful, and it's about 76 degrees.
Awesome. I think we are live, Shahid. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Sister Act podcast. I'm Hurnasa Faryad. I'm the founder and one of the co-hosts of the Sister Act podcast. With me today is my wonderful co-host, Rabbi Susan Shankman, and unfortunately, Pastor Michelle could not join us today. We also have Shahid Rahman, who is the executive director of the American Muslim Institution, which is the mother hub of our podcast, because the Sister Act podcast is a project of the American Muslim Institution. And I'll pass it over to Shahid in a second. But we're so honored to have Pastor Willie Barber II here today with us to start this amazing conversation that is so needed in this time. And we just couldn't have asked for a better representative to come on with us today and really teach us about what's going on and give us input about what we can do and what we can do going forward from this day on. But before we get to him, I'm going to give the mic to Shahid so he can say a few words.
All right. Thank you so much, Nessa and Rabbi Susan, for putting together this important conversation. I really appreciate you guys. I think I'm very lucky to be seeing you guys 2 days in a row right now. But I'm especially appreciative to have and welcome Pastor Willie Barber II for joining us, especially during these really tense times, not just in Georgia, but throughout the country. Having spoken to him for the last 15 minutes, I can truly appreciate his soft-spoken nature and his temperance and moderation. I hope it's conveyed throughout the webinar today. Having watched the video recording of Ahmaud Arbery's death, and I dare to say lynching, I think people feel a sense of indignation and frustration. And when faced with these challenging times, many people, especially the people that are listening on this audience from different faith traditions, they look for faith not only to help them cope with these challenges, but how to move forward with purpose. How do we take this loss and anger and channel it into some sort of positive action? This is where I believe faith must play a constant role. AMI, American Muslim Institution, was established primarily to face the challenges dealing and related to the American Muslim community. However, our mission is to build an America in which everyone can live in harmony, people of all faith persuasions and people of no faith persuasions. We recognize, as Martin Luther King Jr. said so eloquently, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So I look forward to today's important conversation and look forward to hearing from Pastor Barber II, and again, appreciate him and Hurnasa and Rabbi Susan for facilitating this very important conversation.
Thank you so much, Shahid. So I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation by introducing our amazing guest speaker today. Pastor Willie J. Barber II is the senior pastor of Prospect AME Church in Fortson, North Columbus, Georgia. He is the 2020 Census Liaison for the 6th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, directing and implementing community engagement for social activism for the over 525 AME churches in the state of Georgia, and the 2020 Georgia Statewide Faith-Based Complete Count Committee Liaison, coordinating and managing activities for all associated denominations comprised of more than 3,000 churches in the state of Virginia. Duties include communication and interaction with federal, state, and local officials, presenting and connecting points of synergy between the faith-based community, public and private sectors in the arena of community action. Prior to early retirement, Pastor Barber held positions at the director level for the 3 separate global engineering companies, collectively for 30 years, managing assets of over $14 million annually. A Georgia native, Pastor Barber is a graduate of LaGrange College and continued graduate studies at the University of Georgia, Athens, Georgia, and Emory University Candler School of Theology in Atlanta, Georgia. I want to welcome you, Pastor Barber. I honestly don't have the words to say it, and I talk a lot. So I'm so excited to have you on our show today. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And Pastor Susan and I have been discussing in terms of how important this topic is. So I really want to thank you for coming on today and giving us your time.
Thank you so much. Vanessa, I can't tell you how excited I am. The first time that I met you in Washington, as I was traveling with our bishop here in the state of Georgia, the 6th Episcopal District, Bishop Reginald T. Jackson, whom I am so grateful to for giving me the position of liaison to be able to work with him on his team. In fact, I'll just go ahead and say this quickly, that Bishop Jackson is actually in Brunswick, Georgia, the area in which the horrible tragedy occurred that we're going to discuss today, pushing for social justice on the steps of the courthouse, along with other congressional officials and members. Bishop Jackson is a trailblazer for activism and social justice. So I am looking so forward to the discussion as we get deeper into it, and with my friend, my newly found friend, the rabbi that is on with us as well.
Thank you, Pastor Barber, and thank you so much. I know that Herness has already shared that, Shahid has already shared, but thank you so much for being with us today for this very incredibly important conversation, and certainly a conversation of the moment. And I think it would be helpful as we begin this discussion, it would be helpful for our listeners if you would please start by talking about who Ahmaud Arbery was and sharing a little bit of his background. And then also, we'd also like to have you walk us through what happened to him on the day he was murdered. I know many have seen the video and many are aware, but for those listeners who might not be, I think it would be helpful for us to have the context.
Absolutely. And I'll approach it a little bit differently. I think it's important for us not to use too many comparisons to previous and past events so that the human being's story gets lost. So this is the way that I have, in my mind, gotten to know this young man that I have never met. I've never met his family. I have been in his community, however, over the years, many times. And so I will say that Ahmaud Arbery is like every other young individual, young American, someone who seemed to be full of promise, who was a product of his local community. From all indications, this is where he grew up. This is the place where he found his friends. This is where his family flourished, his mother, his father, siblings, other family members. So this young man, without sounding disrespectful, this young man is like any other young man that you might find next door. Removing ethnicity altogether, he attended high school in his area. He was, for all practical purposes, I believe, a very likable person from what I have heard from interviews with other people, that he got along with with everyone. I heard an interview with his father who said that he was the type of individual who would sacrifice his last resource to help someone else. So this speaks to a 25-year-old who not only had matured, but also had started his journey to learn life lessons of charity and caring and compassion. He was an athlete. And like many young people, I believe that he paid closer attention to his own health than many of us who are older. It drives home the question, what is it that we expect from young Black men these days? Here is someone who is paying attention to his health. Here is someone who is giving in his community. Here is someone who has a job where he's earning. The only thing that I would like to leave with the listeners that is probably most poignant is that this young man was someone's son. He was someone's son. He was a mother's son. He was a father's son. He had friends and siblings and cousins. He was a human being. Without knowing him personally, my heart sinks every time I view that horrible, tragic video, not because I knew him personally, but because I know him as a brother in the life of humanity. It is indescribable how, as believers in any faith, how we can be complicit or complacent when we see tragedies like this. So to sum it up, I believe that this young Black man was not just a young Black man. He was an American. He was a member of his community. He was a living, breathing part of the tree of life. And forgive me, I get a little bit choked up because as I think about how in communities of faith, we not only are trained to view those we serve, but how we feel it just from the Spirit of God himself. I get choked up because now there is a voice that is silenced, that would have contributed to a greater good in this world that we live in. So I leave it with that. There will be weeks and months of descriptions of this young man. He was an amazing runner, from what I understand. He was intelligent. He was giving. He was all of those things. But I want your viewers to please put aside all of the details that are associated with the world that we live in and think very, very plainly and basically about the fact that this was a living, breathing human being that had a right to live, who had not yet experienced life to its fullest.
Thank you. I know we talked a little before we started and went live. This is, I think this is such a challenging moment for us as not just as faith leaders, but as human beings, for all of us. And I think we've seen that in the response and that reminder that you shared. We're talking specifically about Ahmaud Arbery. We know that we can't take that every individual life is precious, that within one life is the life of the whole world and all of the connections and those who are related. And I think that's why in many respects, the fact that that the way in which this has unfolded has also brought an additional level of pain and outrage from people recognizing that this was a human being who had all of those relationships, as you spoke about, and people are wondering and asking why it took 2 months for an arrest in this case. Gregory McMichael and his son Travis were walking free for over 2 months, and that it was only after this video popped up and resulted in all this outrage on social media that we even saw these two men facing charges. And the question arises as well, perhaps there's an additional story behind this incident in terms of how how it pertains to the role of the media. So we're wondering and hoping that you'll be able to share with us your thoughts on why it took more than 2 months for this murder to even make it to mainstream media. And even if there wasn't an arrest, an incident happened. And I think that when we talk about the value of life and the fact that this gap in time and just that question of the role that the media plays and your view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great blessings that I've received in my life is to be surrounded by so many people who have taken an interest in me. Most recently, that of my mentor, Bishop Jackson, is a remarkable man. We talk about politics, we talk about social justice and so forth. And I will say this to your question about why did it take so long for this story to break on the national stage or even on the stage locally in the state. And I'll give a very simple and concise answer. Our society is reactionary. History is a much better report card of who we are than the rhetoric that we present, okay? We had the pandemic going on. We had all types of political conversations going on. America is not necessarily shocked when it hears about the death of another Black man. That is just the truth. It becomes a different story, though, when we see it. And all of a sudden, there are some components of our being that change, because beyond the color of skin and beyond the features of ethnicity, the blood is still red. And the spilling of that blood is still a horrific sight when we have to face it. So I believe that there are a lot of tentacles on this. When we look at it purely from a political and maybe even from a judicial standpoint, it is no secret that oftentimes the wheels of justice turn very slowly, and they don't always turn equally. And in fact, the very definition of oppression is the ability of others to be able to control and oppress. So when we combine the situations of possibly corruption within our legal system with the innate prejudice of some parts of our society, it's a recipe for disaster. So I will say this, I think it took so long because, first of all, it was another young Black man. And number two, there were other factors at play with the involvement of the individuals that were in place, that were involved in the alleged perpetrators of the murder. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Pastor Barber. And I know that all of this is so compact and there's so much going on and there's so many changes that are happening right now that sometimes we get to not see everything that's actually going on. So, there are entities that are holding information back for whatever reason, and that affects not only the victim, but everybody else who's trying to figure out what's going on so that these types of things are not repeated with a certain community that's constantly being targeted. I do want to let the listeners know that if they have questions, we will answer them at the end of the show. So please write it in the comments if you're on Zoom or in the chat room, or if you're on Facebook Live, you can write your questions in the comment section, and we'll get to you at the end of the show. So, now that we have, seen the charges being filed against the father and son who murdered Ahmaud, with so much hesitation from Georgia's DA's office. And, just yesterday, according to BBC, the U.S. Department of Justice is actually considering federal hate crime charges against Gregory and Travis McMichael. But now, how is that Georgia does not have a hate crime bill? And what has been the maze in which the citizens of Georgia have been forced to walk around to even bring this bill to the table, at the Capitol look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really, that's a really good point. Let's start first with the fact that this incident is being investigated on a federal level. That is a good thing. We should also, though, reverse or rewind the tape, and let's look at it locally. It is apparent, and it appears that the local judicial system failed this family. It failed not only the family, but it failed its community. And there would be, the logical chain of events would be that this would have played out in such a way that transparency would have been there. It only became an issue for the state of Georgia when the videotape of the actual incident made its way into social media, all right? The fact that the GBI is now involved is also a good thing. Georgia does not have a hate crimes law. Bishop Jackson has worked feverishly on making sure that something is done, that we would have one. We've been working on that issue for over a year with the congressional leaders in both houses. I'm trying to use my words very carefully because words matter. But the process politically that takes place is frustrating. Because as we were talking, I think earlier in our conversations, I made the comment that oftentimes when we are faced with crossroads and turning points in life, especially in political conversations and in the case of creating laws that are fair to all people, we tend to look at it as an us or them type of environment. And somehow we line up like we're at a football game thinking that, oh, well, if this side gets this, then the other side must get something else. There are times when we must just do the right thing. The hurdles for the hate crime legislation in Georgia is pretty simple. It has been watered down to the point that there are so many loopholes that it is debatable that the current bill that is being sponsored in the House, it's debatable whether or not it would even be effective as a hate crime law. One of the components of argument was that in order for a hate crime to be identified in Georgia, if this present bill passed, there would have to be other crimes that were committed that would be associated with the hate crime itself, and therefore lead to prosecution and so forth. And forgive me, I'm not a lawyer, but I am astute enough to know that when we put so many stipulations on a law, the law becomes ineffective, and those are known as loopholes. And that brings no justice to those individuals that are affected. So, no, Georgia does not have a hate crime law. And I think that particularly in the South is super sensitive to anything that is associated with hate crimes or hate because of our history. And our report card is not very good. So I hope that somehow answers at least part of the question.
No, absolutely. And that's something that we're hoping will change, right, throughout the United States. That is a very important aspect of protecting all of the citizens who live in this country. It's just amazing that we have to have these types of bills to begin with. It's common courtesy. It's common, it's just a morally right thing to do to protect and, understand the importance of saving life and allowing people to live their life regardless of their background, regardless of the faith they believe in, regardless of their skin color. But we're not there, right? We are not there as a country. We're not there. But we have to get there, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're having this conversation. Pastor Barber, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but you struck something there that I don't want it to slip by. Regardless of our faith, it is important for the community of faith to come together to see that there's commonality when it comes to these types of events. This happens to be a hate crime or allegedly a hate crime. I'll be very careful there. This happens to be an event where one individual was slain. But let us think about our places of worship when we talk about hate crime legislation. It has not been that long ago since we were all working on plans to keep our worshipers safe because of the fear of individuals who would hate simply because of a person's ethnicity, their belief, or their religion. This is no different. It is just singular where the other was plural. So it's common sense to say that there should be an airtight, loophole-free law that deters the type of action that took this young man's life.
You just hit the nail with the hammer on the head, right? And, I work in a place of worship. You work in a place of worship. Rabbi Susan works in a place of worship. And, we're constantly dealing with people, whether they're spewing hate speech or hate crimes or threatening us with something or another. We're all in the mix of this. And you're right. As faith communities, we have to come together because one community being targeted is as if we're all being targeted. And that as human beings, our faith teaches us that we have to have each other's back. So I'm completely 100% with you on board with this. I do want to move into the work that you do with Bishop Jackson, who oversees all of the AME churches in Georgia. For our listeners, AME stands for the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I had the privilege to meet you and to sit on a panel with Bishop Jackson in DC, literally 5 days before Ahmaud's murder. And Bishop Jackson had a press conference or release today at 12 noon. Can you give us some insight on what Bishop Jackson, as a hugely recognized religious leader in Georgia and all over the United States, what is his message to other faith groups, and especially around this incident, and what do other faith groups need to do? Because this is not a fight I don't want to use the word fight, but it's not a platform that's only for a certain community. We have to stick together. So what is his message as the bishop?
I think first and foremost, Bishop Jackson would want everyone to understand that yes, we are, as a community of faith, and it is a fight, in this fight together. It is a fight against injustice. To say that we fight injustice does not mean that we fight any one individual or any group of people. The principles that guide the mind that would encourage and push a person to the point of committing a murder like this, these are the things we fight. This is the message from Bishop Jackson. He wants us all to understand that to sit back and be silent is to be complicit. We must, as a community of faith, not be afraid to speak out against the injustices in the world in which we live. It is our job. It is our job as believers to speak out for those who cannot speak for themselves. To be able to say to the rest of the world, it is not okay. It is not okay for us to sit idly by and go to our worship experiences and praise in the way that we praise and then go home and sit back while others are slaughtered in the streets of our cities, our towns, and in our country. That is not the character of a country that prints on its currency, "In God we trust." That is not the character that should be displayed. And it is up to us to not be afraid to speak when our communities are threatened. Politics is not off limits simply because of the separation of church and state. We must be able to speak to laws that are in place and say, just because it is a law, that does not mean that it is a just law. And I think Bishop Jackson, along with myself and other clergy members and of all faiths, I think we would be able to find common ground in saying that injustice for one is injustice for all of us. It could be our son or our daughter tomorrow.
Absolutely. There is a verse in the Quran where, our holy book as Muslims, where God says that you have, and it's all over the Quran, it's not just in one place, but he says that it is incumbent on us as believers to stand up for justice, even if the justice is against ourselves. Like if we're the ones perpetuating injustice, it is incumbent on us to make sure that we're checking ourselves, right? So if we're complacent and we're quiet, we're feeding that fire, right? And we're going to get to that later in terms of what communities need to be doing. But that's something to keep in mind for our listeners, because, we're part of this whole thing and we have to figure out where we're standing.
I totally agree. And yes, Rabbi, please go ahead.
So in one of the other shared texts that exists, I know, in among our religions, and it is the idea that when we save a single life, it's as though we're saving the entire world. When a single life is destroyed, it's as though we're destroying the entire world. That obligation that we all have each and every day to not just preserve the life of one, but through that, it's not just about it's about, as you mentioned earlier, that humanity. And when we don't stand up for the one individual, and when we don't stand up and speak up in one situation, we know that when we don't speak up, and I know that there are I have so many colleagues across the religious spectrum who are talking about this in specifically to this case, that we have a responsibility to speak up and to speak out, that when we stand together, our voice is not only stronger, but we have to remember that we have this responsibility, this God-given responsibility to be there for one another, to support one another, and to stand up for that which is broken. And when we look at this specific situation, what happened to Ahmaud happened to be recorded by a friend of one of the murderers, which also in itself is horrifying. But it is evidence of the injustice that plagues the Black community in the United States. There are countless, as you refer to, countless other cases and incidents in which Black men are profiled by law enforcement and fellow citizens just because of their skin color. We all know that there are systemic and foundational constructs which have been institutionalized in this country. As a faith leader, what do you think needs to happen in order for that system to change? And not just as a faith leader, I think that's an important in terms of how your words come across, but also as not just a lesson, but a guide for all of us who are listening, who care. What needs to happen for the system to change? What can we do?
I think that is a great lead in to an opportunity to make a profound statement, and here it is. I think that we find in America that when an incident like the murder of this young man takes place, we see it as a Black problem. We see it as a problem in the Black community. We see it as something that happens someplace else, and somehow there is this virtual force out there that is to blame. But this is not a Black problem. This is an American problem. This is a national problem. when we find ourselves in the 21st century seeing on video an individual gunned down in the streets, that should be very disturbing to America, not just Black America, but every nationality within America. It should be one of those moments where we say, this is not us, and it's not okay. I think that we have gotten into a place where we have made it acceptable to say the unthinkable, think the unimaginable, and do the deplorable. I think we have found ourselves in that. There are freedoms in this country assured to us by the Constitution. There are rights that are gifted to us by the Constitution. Thank God for the individuals that He created to put pen to paper. But with all of those freedoms and all of those rights come responsibility. And the responsibility says, I cannot bring harm to anyone to serve my own self-interest. And I think that the greater conversation has to be centered around, are we a nation connected and united, or are we a nation divided and segregated? Because by division and segregation, we somehow are able to justify what happens to another human being who happens not to look like us or to sound like us, because we can disassociate ourselves. And I think that that's the other facet of the dilemma for the greater American culture, that somehow other people are other. They are other. That's a very dangerous mindset, and it gives justification to wrongdoing. So as a faith servant, I like that better. As a faith servant, I think it is really hard for all of us to be able to sleep at night knowing that this level of disregard for human life exists, and it should wake us up every morning with a cold sweat to say, I must do something about this. I must. Before I do anything, I must find a way. I must seek guidance from God to be able to press so that this will not be the reality of the generations to come. That is on our shoulders, not on the shoulders of our children, not on the shoulders of our children's children, but on our shoulders.
Pastor Barber, I couldn't agree with you more, but at the same time, we need to call people to stand up. We need people to understand the severity of this issue. When we look at the systemic problem of how the foundation of this country was established in order to perpetuate and limit the Black community's growth is undeniable. And no one can say that that's not true. I mean, there's studies done in this, whether you look at the African-American women who can't access healthcare, college, university, kids who have a specific types of name being, denied job, even though they're as qualified or even more qualified than other applicants, housing, food insecurity. All of these things are tied to this system, and this racial profiling is another segment of it, right? And we're kind of tired of this constant cycle that keeps happening in this country. But dialogue is great, but there needs to be some form of movement to shake and break this systemic built-in foundation that has been there, because we can tell people, well, what you're saying is racist, or what you're doing is a hate crime or hate speech, but that doesn't change if you're changing one person, but the system's still working against you, right?
I totally agree. I totally agree. But see, this is where we are a reactionary nation. This goes back to that initial statement that I made. this is not new. First of all, it just happens that this young man has the death of Ahmaud Arbery. It strikes us at our core because we can see it. This is not a new situation, and all of the events that you mentioned that are underlying factors, the inaccessibility to resources, the fact that in this country that the nation was built on the backs of those that were enslaved. The fact that there has been systemic and institutional injustice toward people of color from the very beginning, and Blacks specifically, African Americans specifically, whatever adjective we want to use. Those are all the things that have led to what in the minds of some people, this is what has led to making it okay to gun down a young Black man in the middle of the street. We must tackle the horrific legacy of our country, the hate that is so prolific right now, because it's now okay to bring all of that to the surface and spew it in language and in action. We must be able to connect the dot between where it came from. Yes, history. We know our history. I am the product of former slaves in the very area where I live, the farm that I live on. My grandfather farmed, and before him, his father, and before that, my great grandfather, even though emancipation had taken place, had to buy his freedom. All right, we are well aware of our history, but rhetoric really is only valuable when we tell the story. We have to make events turn into a movement. How do we do that? We have to do that, first of all, by saying within our own communities that it is not okay to roll over and accept injustice and laws that are not beneficial to our people and all people. That's a start, all right? But then at the same time, we have to help our brothers and sisters to understand. I learned this from another mentor many years ago. Sometimes people who have a warped understanding of right and wrong, we have to physically get in there and help them understand that this is not acceptable. So rhetoric is one thing, picketing is one thing, marching is one thing, but in a movement, there has to be some action taken. And the most effective way to do that, I'm afraid, in this country, is to be able to infiltrate the power structure of our country. We have to do that through legislation. We have to do that through the unglamorous hours spent on walking the halls of our Capitol buildings, lobbying Congress, talking to members of the Senate, and doing all of the grueling work and saying that we're not going to go away. I often say, Vanessa, that we are expected to march. We are expected to carry picket signs. We are expected to make a lot of noise. What we are not expected to do is to have a view that takes us into the belly of the problem, and that is to change the laws that continue to imprison and keep our people bound. Yeah.
I can definitely say amen to that, and we're all with you. And you hit it right where it needed to be. So I'm from New York, and I usually call things out as they are. So you're going to have to excuse me being blunt sometimes. But I want to talk about the importance of the white Americans and their process of actually speaking out against this murder, especially those white folks who are kind of in the middle. I'm not racist, but this isn't my problem. Why is it so important for these folks in particular to stand up and fight for justice for the Black community in this country? And this is actually a question that one of our listeners actually posted as well. So, we're getting one answer to the same question. So Tom Brady, actually, who is a famous football player, I'm pretty sure you know, was pushed to, support for an investigation, which he did. And he's using his celebrity status to bring not only awareness to this issue, but in my opinion, this is something he has to do, right? As a privileged white man, he doesn't have to worry about being shot at while jogging. He will never understand that. But it is imperative for people in his position to speak out. And a lot of my friends who happen to be white are asking, what can we do? How do we, as, usually being of the same race as the perpetrators who are committing these crimes, what is their responsibility? What is it that they need to do in order to be the ones who are part of the cycle to change things?
Yeah. It's surprisingly simple, in my view. To be a human being is to be able to recognize that there are others around you who are human. All right. What is the responsibility of white America? Well, the responsibility is the same as Black America. It's the same as any community of color. It doesn't matter that your ethnicity or your nationality. Do what's right. Yes, Tom Brady, you used that example. Yeah, it was right for him to use his celebrity to bring attention to this issue. But there's one Tom Brady, but there are a lot of Joes and Johns and Sarahs and Marys and Rebeccas all over this country who have neighbors. Talk to your neighbors, look them in the eye, and when the conversation, and not only when the conversation comes up, but raise the conversation. What do you think these people were doing when they gunned down this individual, when they gunned down this man, this son, this friend, this brother, this cousin of somebody, when he was killed in the middle of a street in broad daylight? It is the responsibility of all Americans to say it is not okay for any group to be targeted under any circumstance for any reason. This is a country of laws. This is a country of rights, and they apply to all of us. And I do think that it's easy for us to point to celebrities and say, what they can do. But let me share something that's a little bit off topic, okay, when it comes to using our status and our voice. Everyone has a voice. There's a phrase that I use often: just because we cannot do everything, that does not mean we have the right to do nothing. We cannot all go to Brunswick, Georgia and stand on the steps of the courthouse. We cannot all go to Washington, D.C. and lobby in the halls of Congress. But in our neighborhoods, in our living rooms, in our homes, we can talk to those that we come in contact with daily and express just the common decency of the respect of life. How can we make arguments to defend the life of the unborn when we have such little regard for the life of those who are already here? How is it that we can watch a football game or a basketball game and cheer on a Black man when a little boy, yet to be a man, is in danger of losing his life by walking across the street? Those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask all over America. They cannot just come up at a Black dinner table. It can't just come up when people of color are gathering. It has to be everyone. And hopefully it didn't get lost, but that is what, if your listener or is asking what can he or she do, just recognize that if it were your son or your daughter that was out there unprotected, how would you feel? Put yourself in that position as much as you can. I know that it's virtually impossible for anyone to know the depths of what it's like to be Black in this country if you're not Black. But try. Just because you can't do everything, it is not an excuse to do nothing.
we have a similar teaching in to what was just mentioned in Jewish tradition. It's Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It comes from the Pirkei Avot text. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. That there's no way that any one of us can do this work alone, but we are obligated to be part of it. We have that. It's incumbent upon each of us to be a part of this work. And I want to take what you're saying just a step further, because as we look and in this conversation, we're three people representing three different faith groups, in which the sanctity of life is so important. It's at the heart of our faith traditions, and we have to be there for each other. We have to stand up for each other, for not only for the people we know, as you said, we need to be able to teach that within our own houses of worship, but it needs to go beyond those walls. That we need to start there, but also take it to stand with each other. And when you're speaking about what people can do, we find ourselves in a very unique moment. I know all of us have been together with others of other faith traditions, standing in halls of, whether in Capitol buildings or in the halls of Congress, and lobbying and speaking out and being part of vigils and so many moments in which we stand together. But right now we are in a place that we haven't been, and that's that place of being in our homes and trying to do this work of community that is a little bit more challenging. So I'm wondering if you have suggestions, and maybe Hernessa or Shahid as well. What can we do when we're at home and we can't gather together to go and lobby a congressman or a senator or bring those signs to the place where they need to be seen, and to make sure that our voices are heard and that our voices are heard together. And this is, again, uncharted territory, but what can we do to help people, for those who are listening, who want to get involved in this cause, and who want to do this work? We have time. Many of us have a little bit of extra time. Maybe, I know we all talk about how we're on Zoom and we're doing all these different things, and it seems like time has got its own boundaries and parameters now. And that being said, we have this time and ability to do something. What can we do?
Well, I'll jump in before I lose the thought. First, I want to make sure that we understand that when we have tools at our disposal, we're often gifted them to use for good. Unfortunately, most of the time with a lot of us, and myself included, we find ourselves serving our own interests. You just mentioned we have Zoom, and we have all types of platforms out there for social media and this and that. I would dare say that within the community of faith, and I'm going to be very, very critical of us, okay, that we probably spend more time on our own self-interest on social media, utilizing the technological tools that we've been forced to use during this time of isolation and so forth, on our own selfish desires versus that which we would be compelled to do for the common good of humanity, the things that God compels us to do for each other versus what's satisfying my need or my desire at the moment. That's one thing. I will say that. The other thing that I think is vital is that we should understand that the same energy we put into the individualism of our lives, it is valuable to seek a way to become a part of a bigger whole with people that don't look like us, that don't sound like us. Reach outside of your box. The 6th Episcopal District here in Georgia, there is a website. You can send in questions. You can do all kinds of things via email. You can look up a church that may not be a part of your community, and reach out to them. Ask them, what can I do as someone who lives 40 miles away, 20 miles away? Call them on the phone, all right? Use the old-fashioned method of just calling someone and say to them, what can I do to help you in an effort that you may be undertaking? People all over America are hungry right now. They're starving, literally. No food to eat. How can we reach out regardless of the color of our skin to provide a meal for someone within our community of faith? Is that so hard? I don't think so. I think that it takes effort, but it's not hard. Put pen to paper, write a letter. You know, that sounds old-fashioned, but you know what? When a member of Congress gets a letter, they're like, oh wow, this is different. I better check this out. Send an email to your officials. Be involved. And I know that sounds very, very generic, but we often get so wrapped up in the details. I'm thinking about Ahmaud Arbery, and I'm thinking about what difference it will make when we bombard those individuals that are in power with comments and letters, and not just from Black people, but from all people. And we say that this is not acceptable. What will happen? It worries individuals who are complacent when they get that kind of traffic, right? So let us engage, and let us step outside of our comfort zone. In the New Testament, there is the passage of scripture that says that we battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. And my brothers and sisters who are listening, it is important for us to recognize that the evil within the hearts of men, that is not new. We're not fighting people. We are fighting the absolute evil that wants to destroy the creation of God.
Pastor Barber, you touched upon this concept of writing letters to our elected officials and having conversation and changing laws. I want to tell you a story about what happened within our Muslim community about 2 years ago. So I head the Outreach, Public Relations, and Interfaith Department at the Adams Center, which is the second largest mosque in the whole country. And I had Delegate Tran, who serves Fairfax County, reach out to me because she proposed a bill. She's not even Muslim, for the Senate and House here in the state of Virginia. And it was dubbed the Muslim Registry Bill. And she wanted me to go down to Richmond to testify. In the first year, I went many times with her. And because of language, they made her change. And this was her first year serving as a delegate. And, we learned a lot of the processes that actually happened. And the whole premise of the bill was to stop the state of Virginia from disseminating a list of Virginians based on race, ethnicity, and religion to the federal government if the federal government chose to ask for it. Although we know that the federal government can actually get the list regardless, they have access to that in so many different ways, but that it wasn't going to come from Virginia, and that elected officials were not going to be the ones who are going to give it over because they're serving the communities in which they're serving, right? They're part of the system. So the first year it didn't go through because there was just so many different issues with the language. Last year in 2019, she reintroduced the bill. I went again a couple of times. We went in front of the FOIA council, in front of this council, half committees, subcommittees, and it finally went through. But now the most important thing here is that this was someone who wasn't even Muslim, who on their own initiated a bill to protect a certain community. And that goes in line with what you're saying, is that you want to help, you have to do it through laws. You have to do it through legislation. You have to do it through the people that we've elected and put into office who are supposed to serve us, right? And that's the type of leadership we need. We need people on our stage who we've elected who are going to fight for us. And I was so shocked that she actually did that. Like, wouldn't it shock you if you heard this on your own, that someone, who's not even Muslim, has nothing to gain from it, would go and do this for 2 years?
I would be totally shocked, but overjoyed at the same time, okay? I think that is a fantastic story. That is perfect. Look, ordinary people, and this is a cliche, but ordinary people do extraordinary things every day. We just don't hear about it. Let us set ourselves up for the extraordinary task that is before us, and that is to make a difference in the world in which we live, make it better for everyone. And here is one of the examples. You were in Washington at that very grand sanctuary, the National Cathedral, for a purpose with the census. You were there because you believed that by doing the work that's not glamorous, the work that is tedious, the work that's not exciting with the census, that eventually it will make a difference in the lives of the people in your communities, in the lives of people you don't even know, right? So that's the kind of work that we have to do. I'll put in that plug for the census. We need to encourage everybody that is in our communities to please. We know a lot of the problems. This murderous event in Brunswick, Georgia is a problem. The pandemic is a problem. But part of the solution is us participating in the constitutional right of every, there is no other event in America where everyone, regardless of your citizenship, can participate together, be counted, so that we can change these things from the grassroots of its origin, the injustices in our nation. Let us do that and encourage others to do it. I thank you for your story. I'm going to remember that, because so many of us won't take the first step, okay? Because, it's not going to make a difference. But bless you for that, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought it was relevant to bring it up and say, like, look, there are people who are doing it, and we need to use that as an example all across this country. So it's great to actually bring that to light. And Shahid, I think you want to say a few words as well before we move into Q&A.
Yes, definitely. I wanted to address Rabbi Susan's earlier question about what we can do. I think one of the major challenges that I see is when we look at this issue as a systematic issue, sometimes people are overwhelmed. We can't tackle this major infrastructure, this major institutional racism over 200 years. And I think one of the major challenges that we have as a country, and more so as a people, at least from a psychological point of view, is we need the leadership to give us 1, 2, 3 easy things that they can take away from a meeting like this and implement in their communities, in their local communities. I think if the tragedy of Ahmaud has shown us anything, it's that in that tragedy, by people coming together and targeting all of their efforts into what's going on in Georgia, they were able to at least make a small step and make a difference. So I think that type of leadership and direction, we would very much appreciate that from the people on the ground, but also action items. I mean, I know one of them that I took away from today was we should reach out to our elected officials, but there's going to be at least 500 to 1,000 people that are going to watch this. And I think with the remaining time, at least if we can come up with some more ideas, especially from the leadership on the ground, I think that would be very powerful in giving action items to the millions and millions of people who have watched that video and who want to know what can they do. And everyone is going to, I'm sure everyone after they get off this webinar is going to pick up their phone and call their congressman. But if there's more to be done, we look forward to your leadership and guidance.
You know, I believe that that challenge is well overdue. It's well overdue. I would say that, first of all, yes, we do need to let our elected officials know we're listening and we're watching. To be complacent is to be complicit. I believe that when we don't do anything, then we enable wrongdoing to continue. Unfortunately, if we only make the effort one time, it's going to get lost in the shuffle. This is not an event. This is, Ahmaud should be the face for what is wrong with our society. He should be the face of what needs to be fixed in our society. Let us not allow his death to be in vain, if you will. Let us use that to say, you know what, every time I think about injustice, I'm going to think about Ahmaud. Every time I think about some law that is a loophole for folks to perpetrate hate, I'm going to think about Ahmaud. Every time I hear someone brush under the rug that institutional racism does not exist, let us think about Ahmaud. Let him become the face for a movement that says a responsible America is an America that fights for all races and against racism. And there's no way to justify, there's no way to make ourselves feel good about giving everyone equal voice when the voice that is speaking is wrong and tainted and filled with hatred. I think that is one thing that we can do, and it starts with making this country know that we are all listening, watching, and we have a voice. By whatever means necessary, whether it's pen to paper, whether it is through social media, don't let up, and don't give the media itself a pass. This story was out there in February, but it didn't get traction until it was broken to a major news outlet, and a reporter was allowed to go in and continue to dig and get deeper into the story. Some of our mainstream media talk hosts have even said, yeah, I'd heard about it, but to be honest with you, it didn't really hit home until the video came out. So.
Thank you so much, Pastor Barber. So we're going to move into our Q&A. I have a few questions for you from some of our listeners. Someone is asking, what is the atmosphere in Georgia right now amongst the locals?
Within Brunswick, Georgia proper, it is extremely tense. People are angry. They are, even though it's been months since the event, people are now just trying to find a way to vent, I think. For so long, their voices were silent. So in Brunswick, Georgia proper, I think it is a very tense and volatile place. All over the state, there is not a conversation that takes place where someone is not talking about Ahmaud Arbery. And within the Black community and within communities of color, I think that it has rehashed the fear and anxiety that parents have for their children to be out in public. I have a 27-year-old son and a 25-year-old daughter. And yeah, I get nervous. So I think that is probably to some degree the same feeling throughout Georgia. Yeah.
Pastor Barber, what do you think? Some of our listeners have asked about the idea of taking multi-faith leaders or leaders from multi-faith communities to the church where Ahmaud is affiliated to pray together. Some actually, I think, also suggested going to the church where the perpetrators attend. But that idea of bringing multi-faith leaders together, and I know that's complicated at the moment, but bringing an interfaith, a multi-faith community in to be a part and connect with the community.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that speaks to the heart of what a faith community does. When in times of tragedy, in times of difficulty and affliction, we band together and we try to find the commonalities to express a common good and to provide healing for the land that has been damaged and wounded. That is important. I would say to the second part of that, going to the church where the perpetrators worship, we would have to make sure that the spirit in which we do what we do is in the right place. God does not, in my opinion, I don't want to claim that I know God's thinking, but in my opinion, I do believe that God only allows that which is rooted in good to flourish. So if our objective is to make a statement, I doubt whether that would be helpful nor effective. But I absolutely believe that if our hearts are in the right place and there is an opportunity to connect with that community of faith as well, that we should extend the olive branch, if you will, extend a hand and say, we are like you in that we share a faith in God, or at least we share a faith in good. Let us try to work together to make our world a better place. We can present all we want, but there is also the reality that we should not be surprised if it is rejected. And that should not be a deterrent. That should be more encouragement. But I think it's a fantastic idea to come together in that town, in Brunswick, Georgia, at the church, reach out to the leadership of his church, to his family. I mean, this has the potential of leaving Ahmaud's family out. It's so big. But these are people who have lost their loved one. Let us also embrace them. Continue to find ways to send support, whether through words or through social media or whatever. But I encourage that. I think that's a great idea.
Yes, and
let's organize.
That's what I was going to say. And if this COVID-19 wasn't around, maybe we could have taken a delegation even from where we are. We could have come down and visit. But maybe when things slow down, maybe Rabbi Susan and I can take a trip down there and come see you, and we can go there together. I think that would be an awesome trip. What do you think, Pastor Barber? We'll bring Shahid
I think that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So before we sign off, Pastor Barber, I do want to give you the floor for a couple of minutes to have a closing statement, and then we'll sign off after that.
Okay, very good. And again, Vanessa, thank you so much for the opportunity. I am grateful to Rabbi and all of my newly found friends today for allowing me to be a part of this very powerful moment. I am extremely grateful to my mentor and my bishop, Bishop Reginald T. Jackson, for his steadfast work in social justice. It has inspired me to continue to push my way. But to the rest of your listeners and to America, anyone who is listening, it is vital that we do not allow this moment to default into something other than an opportunity to make a difference. Let us not get caught up in the excitement of the rhetoric. Let us do our level best to make Ahmaud Arbery's memory not just some event on a flat screen, but let us make it that his death will be life for others. I'll make a really quick statement, and I can remember being 25, okay, way back before there was electricity. So I remember in my secular work going out into a neighborhood that was very affluent. I had just I had taken on my first job, and I had been shipped all over the country. And I remember going through a neighborhood that was very affluent, and there was construction going on, literally, not kidding. I was out west. I was fascinated by the amenities of just the studded buildings, okay? And without hesitation, I walked up to that building. I walked all around the building. And when my trips and my travels would take me back to that neighborhood, I would go and watch the various stages of construction. And when it was finished, I was like, wow, this would be a great place to live. Maybe I could live here one day. It's funny that that was one of the first things I thought about when I saw the video of Ahmaud walking through that construction site. What's to say that this young man was not aspiring to have something greater than what he had imagined? And for that, he lost his life. That is tragic. That is horrific. That is disturbing. The only difference between that young man and myself today is that he was 25 and I'm 54. The only difference between his life and mine is that he was curious, but then he didn't see his next birthday. My life allowed me to live my dream. All of you listeners, all of you who are tuned in, ask yourself, is it okay for America to sacrifice one more life that will never realize its dreams? Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this podcast.
No, Pastor Barber, we can't say thank you enough for you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit with us today and really give us so much information, so much to think about, so much to do. And that's what we wanted. We wanted for our listeners to really get a firsthand view of what's going on down there and the things we can do in order to be a source of support in changing what needs to be actually changed. So thank you so much for coming on as a friend. And this is not the first time I'm seeing you, and it won't be the last. I do hope to definitely come down to Georgia. I've never been to Georgia, so there'll be a first ticker for that. And I'll bring Rabbi Susan with me. We'll see about Shahid if he behaves.
Bring him along.
Okay. But honestly, I want to thank you so much for giving us all of this wonderful, wonderful words and hope and looking things from a positive perspective and giving us real ideas that we can actually take with us. And once we're off of here, people can use in their life to make that change. So thank you so much. On behalf of Rabbi Susan and Shahid and everybody else at the American Muslim Institution, I want to thank you so much. If Rabbi Susan has anything to say, she can go ahead. And then
I just want to add, it's wonderful to be in conversation with each other, and for those who are listening or watching to see this dialogue and to be part of it. And I want to just echo what Pastor Barber said about reaching out, not only to those in positions of power, which I think is so important for us to do. Even if you haven't done it before, the first step is just looking up who is that person in your area who holds office. Who's the person to reach out to? And we are more than happy to help with the language of it can be so easy, and there are already pre-constructed statements that people can share. So we're happy to share those ideas. But even easier than that, reach out to your neighbor in the community that when we talk about that's not my problem. Again, we're all one community, certainly one community of faith. We may have different paths and different ways to get there, but the idea of just reaching out and connecting, as we're connected virtually right now, but and perhaps in Georgia later, and we all need to work to make that community more connected, to make it personal, to make sure that we have those relationships with those other communities, and to continue to stand together and raise our voices together. So I encourage you to also do that. Just look at you can look up, whether it's to look in Brunswick, Georgia, and to see the communities there and reach out to one of the AME churches, but also to look in your neighborhood, a house of worship that is not of your faith, and just reach out and say, I want to get involved, I want to connect. I'd like to know how we can work together. And that's just that first step. And I know these times make it challenging, but now we need community more than ever. And I feel so blessed to be a part of this faith community and to be able to share with all of you today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi Susan. Again, Pastor Barber, we can't thank you enough. This will not be the last time we have a conversation with you, but we're looking forward to working with you and making sure that all these things actually become something that goes into fruition. And thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for your words. Have a blessed day. Take care of yourself. And please keep us in your prayer, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
God bless you. Be well.
You too. Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.